what exactly is a public design, and
Right.
how what are the different types in which we can evaluate public policy. Also, we have learnt about legislative review of public policy, and that
Okay.
how what are the instruments through which a public policy is to be carried out. These are the things that we have learned so far.
All right. Great. Great. So, so the process of policy making actually has a number of aspects to it, and I think most of the aspects you have already covered. But the the theme that we'll be discussing today, which is the drafting. So, Kalpeshi, I think I can go ahead now.
Divashi will please introduce.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we will starting in your after your introduction. Divashi,
Okay.
over.
So, with your permission, may
Okay,
I
sure.
start? So, it's my pleasure to
Please, please.
welcome you. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 10-day online national capacity building program on legislative drafting, public policy making, and legislative analysis, which is jointly organized by Sambhav Initiative and Pro Bono India. I, Divyanshi Rathod, moderator of today's session. Thank you for joining us today. So, before I move forward, I would like to mention that the last few minutes of the session will be reserved for Q&A. And today's session is on practical session on drafting of public policy. So, it's an absolute honor for me to introduce our distinguished speaker. Sir is an respected legal scholar, researcher, and policy professional with expertise spanning law, governance, and public policy. Sir holds an LLM from OP Jindal Global University, where he graduated as a silver medalist, securing the second rank. Sir has also earned his BA LLB degree from the same institute, receiving prestigious merit-based scholarship in recognition of his academic excellence. Sir currently holds the position of Program Manager, Public Policy in the Office of Vice Chancellor at Yashowardhan University, a role in which he is central to organizing key initiatives like the Good Governance Yatras 2025. In addition, Sir heads the content strategy and coordination efforts from the Dashram blog and leads the community management for Dashram Labs. Under his leadership, the Dashram School of Public Leadership has flourished as a hub for thought leadership in New Delhi. Previously, Sir held the position of Research Fellow at India Foundation, where his work expanded across numerous prestigious events, including the Indian Ocean Conference 2023 at the NLIU India Foundation Constitutional Law Symposium. He also organized several symposiums and conferences contributing to the Foundation efforts in advancing constitutional and legal discourse. Sir has authored and co-authored numerous research articles as well as books in renowned journals and edited volumes. His work has been published in prominent journals such as the History and Sociology of South Asia and the International Journal of Law and Policy Review. Outside his former roles, Sir has been an active participant in various intellectual forums. Sir has served as the founding student coordinator of GJU Conservative Society and the Indic Studies Society at OP Jindal Global University. Sir has also held leadership position in IND Genius GJU, formerly think tank, and represented India at the Asian India Youth Summit in 2023, where he delivered the country's presentation. Sir has also presented various prestigious international conferences. So it's an honor to host you, sir, today. Over to you.
Uh, okay. So, am I audible now? Great.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
All right. Namaste Sabiko. So, first of all, I apologize for not being able to take the session at 11:30 as it was previously scheduled, because I had some personal engagements going on, and at the last minute I had to get the timing changed. So, today's session, as I was mentioning earlier, was it's supposed to be on the drafting of public policy. So we are particularly focusing on the drafting process of public policy. But when we talk about the drafting process, the reason why I asked, the participants to mention what has already been previously discussed is because the drafting of public policy is a sum total of the entire policy making process. So if you have to engage in the nuances, if you want to understand the nuances of how a policy is supposed to be drafted, you need to be very clear about the entire policy making process. So think of public policy as a supply chain where you have to begin with the basic problem, that is the basic raw material for the formation of public policy. And from that point, you have to travel throughout to a delivery of a policy paper or a policy draft, which we'll be discussing today. So now, as one of the participants has already previously mentioned that you have covered what do we mean by public policy. You have covered what is the difference between public policy and law. You have also covered how a policy should be designed, and who are the stakeholders that need to be involved in designing a particular policy, so on and so forth. So many of these things you have already covered. Now, what you need to keep in mind during the drafting of a policy is that you don't need to be very confined with the definition of drafting itself. So what often happens, like one of the points that was mentioned was that policy is different from law. That is true, that policy is different from law, but then you also need to understand that law is a consequence of a particular policy. So law is your final destination. When we talk about public policy, policy can be for private entities as well. Policy can be for corporate entities as well. Policy is for state entities as well. लेकिन जब हम public, so are the delegates fine with both English and Hindi?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. So when we refer to policy, particularly in the context of the policies which are being made by the state as in the central government and the state governments, then those policies have to be translated into certain legislations. So ऐसा नहीं होगा कि the state has prepared a particular policy brief and then it won't translate it into law, because if a policy has to be implemented, it has to have some legal foundations to it, right? So you have to also understand that ultimately when you are drafting a certain policy, you have to keep in mind that it has to be drafted in a manner where it can be readily translated into a certain legislation. And at the same time, it should also be implementable and applicable to the context for which it has been drafted. So, am I making sense with this? This basic point is clear. Hello. Any of the delegates? Is this basic point about difference between law and policy and the interlink between policy and law, is it clear? All right, yes. So now let's quickly do an activity, just 2 minutes. Any of the delegates, any one or two of the delegates, if you were to draft a policy on how to ask questions during today's session, how would you draft that policy? If you could give some basic ideas about it. Vikramaditji, why don't you go ahead? Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Just throw some basic ideas about how to. Okay, Vikramadit needs to be unmuted. Jayant, could you please unmute Vikramadit? Yeah, he's
Yes, sir.
unmuted.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Can you, sir, please repeat your question?
Yeah. So
Sir.
my question is, if you were to draft a policy for today's session, answering the question, how do we moderate the questions for today's session, and how should the questions be raised? What is the order in which the questions should be raised? What would your initial thoughts be? What would be
Sir,
your policy for moderating today's Q&A?
sir, I think मुझे
Whether,
ऐसा लग
हाँ,
Yes, sir. सर आई थिंक मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि एक तरीका ये हो सकता है कि आप जैसे स्टेप बाय स्टेप जो चीजें सिखा रहे हो, जैसे 5 मिनट के सेशन के बाद हम कुछ क्वेश्चंस इनवाइट कर सकते हैं, उसके बाद फिर एक 5 मिनट का सेशन, फिर एक क्वेश्चन इनवाइट कर सकते हैं। दैट मे
right,
बी वन आइडिया, क्योंकि इससे तुरंत ही जो आपने कॉन्सेप्ट समझा है वो क्लियर हो जाएगा, उस पर तुरंत जो क्वेरीज क्लियर हो जाती है।
right,
अदरवाइज अगर हम लास्ट में क्वेश्चन लें तो हो सकता है कि कई स्टूडेंट्स का क्वेश्चन मिस हो जाए जो पहले वो सोच रहे थे वगैरह। So I think that
right.
may be one idea from my side, sir.
Okay, okay,
Thank
ठीक
you,
है.
sir. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone else? So there are some responses in the chat as well. Vaibhav Tripathi has mentioned that the first question would be when should the questions be asked? Correct. Whether after the session or mid-session. So like Vikramadit has suggested that we can do it mid-session. Like after every 5 minutes of me delivering certain remarks, you can ask the questions. Then Madhuri has suggested that first would be deciding quantitative factors and making rules regarding that, like time duration. So these are the technical aspects that need to be addressed when, say, moderating a Q&A, right? Now, the reason why I chose to provide this question and open it up for the delegates to ask, to give their suggestions was that now perhaps some of you can see the complexities that are involved in policy making. Even if you talk about such basic issues like how to moderate a session, then also it raises serious questions about whether the questions that have to be asked should be after every 5 minute intervals, or should all the questions be taken together and first I should be delivering the remarks, after that there should be a separate Q&A in which questions could be clubbed together and taken. Should the questions be taken one by one, or should 4 or 5 questions be clubbed together and then I should be answering the questions? Because each and every decision that I make will be impacting what you gain from the session and will also impact how I deliver the session. So say for instance, if I take questions after every 5 minutes, that would be very beneficial for the for the participants, because you can immediately raise your queries and I'll be able to answer them then and there. So you are clear about the thought that has been laid before you, and hence you will be able to form a link or a chain of thoughts as we proceed down the session. However, it will be difficult for me as a stakeholder, because since I am delivering this session, it will be difficult for me to keep my chain of thoughts intact, because every 5 minutes if a question is being raised, that breaks my chain of thoughts. So so the point that I'm trying to make over here is that there are certain complexities involved in policy making. Now, we have to take into consideration the concerns of all the stakeholders. So you have to take into consideration the concern that I raised, that boss, I cannot answer questions after every 5 minutes. Otherwise, it breaks my chain of thoughts and I won't be able to deliver the session properly. But I also have to consider the things that you are raising, the concerns that you have raised, which is key. Boss, you will have to do this. Otherwise, we won't have clarity on what we are supposed to do. So now there is a deadlock. There is a deadlock between the speaker and between the participants, because the participants want that they should have clarity on each and every point that is being made. And I want that my chain of thought should not be broken. How do you resolve this as a policy issue? And how do you say, if I were to delegate this task to any one of the participants, stating that within 5 minutes, provide me a draft in which you mention the rules of governing today's session or moderating today's session, the person will be in a fix. The person won't be able to decide how the policy should be drafted. So अब शायद आपको समझ में आ रहा होगा कि मतलब ये जो मैंने अभी भाषण दिया है आपको इस एग्जाम्पल के थ्रू, उसका मेन मुद्दा ये है कि जब तक आप मतलब ड्राफ्टिंग प्रोसेस से पहले के जितने इंस्टेंसेस हैं या जो स्टेप्स हैं, उन सबको जब तक आप कंसिडरेशन में नहीं लोगे, तब तक आप ड्राफ्टिंग कर ही नहीं सकते हो. So which means that first of all, you need to identify your problem statement. The problem statement needs to be identified once the policy making process begins, and the problem statement needs to be very clearly specified when the policy is actually being drafted. So that is the first step. Once your problem statement is identified, you need to identify who is the entity who will be actually addressing this particular problem statement. Say, for instance, you come up with a problem statement which falls under state list of the constitution, and you are addressing the policy paper to the central government. तो आपको पता होगा कि constitution में 3 lists हैं, right? There is a list which the parliament, a list of themes which the parliament legislates upon. Then there is there's another list which is the state list, जिसपे state governments या legislatures legislate करते हैं. Then there is a concurrent list in which both the parliament and the state legislatures can prepare laws and policies. So now if you are picking up an issue which is supposed to be or mandated by the constitution to be addressed by the state legislature, and you are addressing your policy paper or your policy brief to the central government or the parliament, then that doesn't make any sense. It will be a total failure, because the person who is supposed to address the problem has not been identified correctly. Am I right? Hello.
Yes, sir, you're
All
right.
right. So now, the first step is identify the problem statement. Second step is identify who are the people or what is the entity that will be addressing your problem statement. The third step is who are the stakeholders involved who will be impacted by the policy that you are drafting. So your policy should not be drafted in a manner which adversely affects any particular stakeholder. Because if that happens, then the policy is bound to backfire. So for instance, say if you have to draft a policy on supply of water in Haryana, in which you include a clause which states that there will be a limit on the water that is being supplied even for irrigational purposes. Now you put the cap at the national average, but the consumption of water in Haryana which is required is more than the national average. Then that will directly impact the farmers of Haryana, and they will revolt against your policy, which means that you have to take into consideration each and every stakeholder who will be impacted by the particular policy that you are drafting. And you have to draft it craftily in a manner that all the stakeholders are satisfied. Now, no policy can satisfy all the stakeholders completely. If that happens, I think it is a very ideal situation. In reality, that is very, very difficult to achieve. But the basic that you need to ensure is that at least, what should we say? At least you prepare the policy in a way which addresses all the stakeholders to a limited extent or satisfies all the stakeholders to a limited extent. Then the next process would be the next step in this process would be, once the stakeholders have been identified and you have thought about the policy that it should be shaped in a manner where none of them is adversely affected, you also need to prepare the draft in a way which does not clash with other pre-existing policies. So this is a major problem in Indian legislations. Major problem. आपको अक्सर आपने, if I'm sure there must be many law students as well in this group, and most of you are public policy enthusiasts. That is the reason why you have registered for this program. So you must be continuously coming across news, or you must have surely heard at least once or twice somewhere that, there has been an overlap in policies. So there is no clarity about which policy has to be followed. And then the judiciary will step in, the judiciary will interfere, and sort of, when there are two overlapping laws, there are legal doctrines as well which state that there shouldn't be any overlapping laws. And if there is an overlap, in that case, the judiciary takes using its discretionary power, it decides that which particular law has to be applied according to the context given. And if the context is not clear, or the context is clear but the laws are immediately clashing, then obviously the judiciary will sort of subdue the implementation of one law, and it will give preference to another law. So there is a kind of balance that needs to be struck. But why does this situation arise? This situation arises because there is a contradiction. So, say for instance, you are asked to prepare a law which governs state electricity boards. Now, the center comes out with a legislation which governs all the state electricity boards. The state electricity boards are already being governed by their own laws, and the center passes certain rules and regulations which directly clash with the laws which are pre-existing, like which are already in place in different states. So there will be an overlap, there will be a clash between these laws. Then the judiciary will have to interfere and give precedence to what the center has promulgated, also taking into consideration that the center does not encroach into what is mandated to be controlled by the state. So such a situation shouldn't arise when you draft a policy. Hence, you have to, before you begin the drafting of a particular policy, you have to be very clear about what are the pre-existing policies and legislations in place on that particular subject. So, say for instance, I'm sure all of you must be aware about the Waqf Amendment Act that has been passed recently by the Parliament. Can any of you just quickly volunteer and perhaps tell a couple of lines about the Waqf Amendment Act?
Sir, yesterday only
Yeah.
our president has given the assent about this bill. Now it become a law, and the major object and the purpose of this bill is to make it more inclusive in the sense earlier through this particular act, like a particular section of the society has uh, you know uh, has tried to we can say that grab the public property as well. So with the commencement of that act, now it would now the process become a more just, and with the help of that just process only you can claim the property for your public for your personal purpose.
Right, right, right. So the Waqf Amendment Act has been brought into place. Now, I'm sure you must also be knowing that some of the statutes have been repealed, right? So the statutes which were brought in by the 2013 Amendment Act have been, some of them have been repealed in the 2025 Amendment Act, which has been brought into place now, right now. Now, say for instance, if a state government, you must be aware that some of the state governments, like there are state वक्फ boards, है ना? तो state वक्फ boards को भी उनको भी मतलब ये करने के लिए लीगली एक लीगल एंटिटीज बनाने के लिए, okay, there is someone in the chat, just a minute. All right. So there are certain the states also have their own Waqf boards. So I think there are almost 25 or 26 state Waqf boards which govern the properties of Waqf properties within respective states. So all of these things are either done through regulations or through legislations. है ना? Now, if the state comes with a policy stating that the central Waqf board's properties will also be governed by the state, then that clearly creates an overlap and a clash in deciding who is the owner of that particular property. Will it be the central Waqf board or will it be the state Waqf board? So in order to avoid such clashes, you just need to be aware about the existing laws and policies in place. So I think my point should be clear by now कि आपको एक broad overview होना चाहिए. You should be well informed about all the policies that are in place. Say tomorrow, for instance, if I ask you to draft a policy on artificial intelligence, you should be well aware about all the regulations, all the policy papers that have been published by the central government on artificial intelligence. Only then can you prepare the draft of a policy. Otherwise, it will be a futile exercise, because you will be mostly what happens is that even at the governmental level, government often tends to repeat what has already been said. So even if you look at their policy documents, much of what has been previously stated is repeated in their fresh policy documents. So that doesn't show a policy shift. But then why to make a policy when there doesn't have to be a policy shift? मतलब आपको आपकी एनर्जी वेस्ट ही क्यों करनी है अगर आप कुछ नया कर ही नहीं रहे हो तो? Simple point, right? So you have, in order to address a certain problem statement which is not being addressed by the pre-existing legislations and by the policies which are already in place, you come up with a solution to the problem statement. Your solution is in the form, it's narrativized in the form of or drafted in the form of a policy. So there shouldn't be any repetition in what has already been stated, else it is a futile policy document. So yeah, okay, there is one more comment. The intention is not about inclusion, about right. So I think so this statement by Dr. Minarul is about the Waqf Amendment Act, but okay, Waqf Amendment Act is just an example here. It's just an example to explain that how policies have to be drafted and what should be taken into consideration while drafting your policies. Now, coming to the next step. अभी तक कितने steps हमने discuss कर लिए? If someone could repeat. If anyone of you could volunteer and repeat the steps that we have discussed till now. Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Now we have discussed the basic steps that have to be followed, starting with the problem statement.
Right. Identification of problem.
And then secondly, identifying the stakeholders. And then
second step is to whom the problem is being addressed.
Yes, for target audience.
The party to whom it is addressed.
The target audience, as in the entity which will be answering or providing a solution to your problem statement. That will be the second step.
Yeah,
the third step is consideration of the stakeholders. Right. Then
we have to identify the existing what you call
Policies
policy,
in place.
etc.
Correct.
And then
Correct.
we have to prepare a policy such that does not contradict the existing policy, uh, so that
Right.
and then we also have to see the which list which is concerned, whether it is the central list, state list, or say
that
concurrent.
is just an example. That is just an
Yeah.
example. वो
And
वैसे
then
ही मतलब
once we
हाँ
have done that, then we have to check for the how we are going to implement this policy. So whether there will be any problem with respect to clash with the
right. So it's not necessarily implementation. Rather, it is the policy has to be drafted in a manner where it does not overlap with any other policy or does not contradict any other policy or legislation which is already in place. All right.
thank you.
So
Yeah.
these,
Tiwari
yeah,
sir, can I interfere?
yeah, please.
Sir, it's going on very well. But these 3 steps have to be followed for all the subjects or specific subjects and
No,
specific
for all the
area.
subjects, for all the subjects. मैं आपको एक बहुत ही broad overview दे रहा हूँ. I'm not talking about any specific policy over here. I'm giving you
Okay, sir.
very broad overview. So this will
Right.
be applicable to any subject that you pick. मतलब whether it is health policy, whether it is education policy,
Right,
AI
right.
policy, किसी भी field में these are the basic steps that you need to keep in mind.
Okay, sir. Okay, done.
But also what you need to keep in mind is कि you are drafting the policy. तो ये जो steps है ना, ये steps आपने already एक तरीके से क्रॉस कर लिए हैं. जब आप ड्राफ्टिंग तक एक पॉलिसी के ड्राफ्टिंग तक जब आप पहुंचते हैं, when you reach the point of drafting a policy, you have sort of already done all these steps, but you have to remember those steps and connect them again and again with your drafting process, because you have to keep them in mind during the drafting as well. Otherwise what happens is that say for example आपने problem अपना identify कर लिया, आपने ये भी आइडेंटिफाई कर लिया कि ये प्रॉब्लम कौन एड्रेस करेगा, बट ड्राफ्ट करते हुए आपने प्रॉब्लम स्टेटमेंट ही सही से नहीं लिखा, आपने प्रॉब्लम स्टेटमेंट में प्रॉब्लम बताया ही नहीं, कुछ और बता दिया, तो योर प्रॉब्लम वोंट बी एड्रेस्ड, राइट? सो इट हैज टू बी वेरी क्लियर.
Can it be called as pilot study? No.
हाँ, मतलब these are some basic steps or basic things that you need to keep in mind when you are drafting.
जी. Okay,
तो
sir.
पायलट स्टडी तो कुछ भी हो सकता है ना, आप कोई भी केस स्टडी उठा के देख लो. यू कैन प्रिपेयर अ केस स्टडी आउट ऑफ एनी सेक्टर. इट कैन बी एजुकेशन पॉलिसी एज वेल, से द एनईपी 2020 है ना, जो नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी हमारी सरकार ने बनाई है, दैट कैन आल्सो बी केस स्टडी इन हाउ अ पॉलिसी हैज टू बी मेड. तो केस स्टडी तो कुछ भी हो सकता है, बट किसी भी पॉलिसी को ड्राफ्ट करते करते हुए आपको ये सारी चीजों का ध्यान रखना है. दैट इज द सिंपल पॉइंट दैट आई एम मेकिंग.
जी सर. ओके सर, धन्यवाद, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद.
Okay. So now coming to the drafting itself, है ना. तो अभी तक हमने जितना भी अभी तक डिस्कस किया है वो था mainly about what all has to be kept in mind before you begin drafting, or when you are sitting with a pen and paper and going to write a policy for a particular sector. These are the things which you need to keep in mind before you start writing. You should be very clear about it. उसके बाद when you actually start writing it, you have to draft it in a manner where it meets certain requirements. Now what are the requirements? Let us talk about them. Problem statement has to be very clear, because any policy has to set a particular agenda, and agenda set करने के लिए your problem statement should be crystal clear. Otherwise the agenda gets diluted. If the agenda gets diluted, then your problem statement won't be answered by any entity whichever you are addressing. Second is that you have to make sure that the government is able to see the problem. So say if you are, for instance, if you are drafting a policy paper on the control of temples and religious institutions by the state. So while drafting a policy paper on the control of temples, say you mention that, the central government and the state government has been controlling temples for past 100 years, and this should not be done because our religious institution should be handed over to the society or the respective religious groups, and the religious group should be allowed to govern their own religious institutions. Now, if you come up with a vague statement like this, that does not address the problem. आपने समस्या तो बताई ही नहीं कि प्रॉब्लम है क्या आपको, तो स्टेट उसको एड्रेस कैसे करेगा? आपको स्टेट को प्रॉब्लम दिखाना पड़ेगा कि स्टेट, सिंस द स्टेट इज गवर्निंग सर्टेन रिलीजियस इंस्टीट्यूशंस, generating or taking the revenue, consuming the revenue that is being generated out of these institutions for its own purposes, and the revenue is not percolating back to the religious groups जिनके वो institutions हैं. This shows the problem that you are facing, and hence it will be able to make the state realize that why this has been presented as a problem. So your policy paper should be very clear about not just the problem statement, but also the state being able to see the problem that you have identified. Hence, it has to be crystal clear, as I've mentioned almost 10 times before. All right. The next step in this is that the government should also be able to consider the solutions that you provide. So the solutions that you will be providing in your policy paper should be such which should be practical, they should be implementable, and they should be obviously legal framework, and such which the government will readily accept. So you sort of need to incentivize the government as well to accept the solutions that you are offering through your own policy paper or your policy draft. Correct? Hello, clear up to here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Then the next step would be that in your draft, you also have to ensure how will the government adopt the solution that you have provided. Now, you when you provide the sort of how should I put it, the blueprint for adopting a particular solution, the blueprint should be very descriptive in the sense that the government should stepwise be given a particular framework that this is the way in which this policy has to be implemented. Say, for example, you want to go ahead with the disinvestment. जैसे back in Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government, they did disinvestment, है ना, of multiple state entities. तो उसको प्राइवेटाइज कर दिया, बहुत सारे एंटिटीज को प्राइवेटाइज कर दिया. अगर आपको इस पे एक पॉलिसी पेपर बनाना हो ऑन द प्राइवेटाइजेशन ऑफ सर्टेन सेक्टर्स, like say privatization of the defense sector, you will also have to show the government how they'll be able to actually implement it. तो ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि आपने सॉल्यूशन दे दिया, सॉल्यूशन आपने प्रैक्टिकल दिया है, उसको इंप्लीमेंट किया जा सकता है, लेकिन आपने सॉल्यूशन के साथ ये नहीं बताया कि गवर्नमेंट को किस तरीके से उसको अडॉप्ट करना है. किस तरीके से अडॉप्ट करने का अर्थ ये है कि उसमें गवर्नमेंट को क्या क्या प्री स्टेप्स लेने पड़ेंगे जिससे पहले कि वो सॉल्यूशन को अडॉप्ट कर सके, और गवर्नमेंट को किन किन लोगों को इन्वॉल्व करना पड़ेगा जिससे पहले कि वो उन स्टेप्स को अडॉप्ट कर सके. तो वो भी बताना आप ही की जिम्मेदारी है. आपके पॉलिसी पेपर में आपको वो भी क्लियरली बताना पड़ेगा कि दीज आर द स्टेक होल्डर्स दैट यू विल हैव टू immediately involve, and once you have involved them, these are the steps in which this particular solution that we are proposing can be implemented. तो ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि उससे कोई chaos create हो जाए. Often what happens is कि policy people who work on policy documents, they are very short sighted. मतलब they just look at the short term goals of a particular bringing in a particular policy. They fail to take into consideration the long term goals. which also need to be addressed. So you have to take into consideration both कि immediate problem क्या है जिसको address करना है, लॉन्ग टर्म प्रॉब्लम क्या है जिसको एड्रेस करना है, और स्टेट उसको कैसे इंप्लीमेंट, कैसे अडॉप्ट करेगा, कैसे इंप्लीमेंट करेगा, राइट?
हाँ जी सर, यहाँ पे एक इंटरफेयर करना चाहूंगी मैं
या
कि अभी
प्लीज।
आप बोल रहे हैं ना कि तुरंत शॉर्ट टर्म वगैरह, तो अभी जैसे यहाँ पे एक महिला की मृत्यु हुई इसके उपचार के दौरान, वो ब्लेम ये लगाया गया कि उसका सही उपचार नहीं किया गया, टाइम पे नहीं किया गया, तो उसकी मृत्यु हो गई। और इमीडिएटली अपने मंत्रालय से ये हुक्मनामा जारी कर दिया, एक्शन लो, डॉक्टर को ये करो वो करो सारा, मतलब
राइट।
राइट्स टाइप, मतलब कि ये नेग्लिजेंस है डॉक्टर की। ऐसे मतलब
हम्म
तुरंत कैसे हम पॉलिसी कैसे बना सकते हैं ना सर जी, है ना?
हम्म हम्म हम्म।
अभी
हाँ नहीं,
मंत्रालय से हुक्म आ रहा है तो बेचारे वो बाकी के लोग कैसे करेंगे काम?
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल नहीं, देखिए पॉलिसी, एक और चीज का आपको ध्यान रखना होगा कि पॉलिसी कोई एक घटना के बेसिस पे नहीं बनती है।
वो मुझे
पॉलिसी,
समझ में आ रहा है सर जी, बट
हाँ
यहाँ पे क्या होता है कि क्योंकि मंत्रालय से आ रहे तो बेचारे हॉस्पिटल इंस्टीट्यूशन वाले मैनेजमेंट परेशान है कि वो मंत्री से हुक्म आ रहा है, ये
हाँ हाँ
बात है।
हाँ।
उस समय
नहीं,
हम कैसे डील करेंगे ऐसे?
तो ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है एक्चुअली, जो आपने अभी रेस किया है, ये बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है। कोई भी पॉलिसी बनाते वक्त या पॉलिसी प्रपोज करते वक्त आपको ये भी ध्यान में रखना होगा कि क्या आपके जो पॉलिटिशियंस हैं और जो लोग सरकार में है, पावर में है, क्या वो उनको एक्सेप्ट करेंगे या नहीं करेंगे। तो जैसे जैसे आपने कहा कि ऑलरेडी कुछ पॉलिसीज इन प्लेस थी, है ना, लेकिन एक ऐसी घटना हो गई, उस घटना के बेसिस पे कुछ प्रोटेस्ट हुए होंगे वहां पे, जिसको मद्देनजर रखते हुए इमीडिएटली लोगों को शांत करने के लिए आपके जो भी मंत्री हैं उन्होंने एक पर्टिकुलर स्टेप ले लिया, है ना, और वो
हाँ
स्टेप
जी, हाँ
लेके
जी।
उन्होंने एक मतलब एक्शन।
अब तो इंक्वायरी होगी ना, तब सारी तहकीकात होने के बाद ही जारी किया जाएगा जो कुछ भी नोटिफिकेशन है इनका। अब तो चल रही है,
राइट राइट
अब
राइट
तो
राइट।
चल रही है इंक्वायरी।
उस पे उन्होंने इन्वेस्टिगेशन चालू कर दी, और
हाँ,
भी कुछ कुछ करेंगे, उसके बाद फिर शायद कोई चेंज लाएंगे या नहीं लाएंगे, जैसा भी। तो
हाँ।
अक्सर ऐसा होता है कि ऐसे ट्रिगर पॉइंट्स आते हैं जिसपे पॉलिटिशियंस को एक्ट करना पड़ता है, क्योंकि आपको मतलब वो अपनी मजबूरियां हैं ना, जैसे कहीं पे अगर किसी चीज को लेके फार्म लॉज सरकार ने लाए थे, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने फार्म लॉज इंट्रोड्यूस किए
हाँ
थे।
जी, हाँ जी, हाँ जी।
उन फार्म लॉज पे आप बहुत डिबेट कर सकते हैं, वेदर देवर गुड, वेदर देवर बैड, है ना, क्या अच्छा था क्या खराब था, उस पे हम मतलब कई दिनों तक डिबेट कर सकते हैं, वो डिबेट चलती रहेगी। लेकिन फैक्ट ऑफ द मैटर इज कि उन फार्म लॉज के अगेंस्ट इतने प्रोटेस्ट हुए कि अल्टीमेटली गवर्नमेंट को फार्म लॉज को वापस लेना पड़ा। तो गवर्नमेंट का अच्छा इंटेंशन रहा भी हो अगर, एंड उन लॉज में अगर कुछ पॉजिटिव रहा भी हो, तो भी द गवर्नमेंट हैड टू बैक ट्रैक बिकॉज द पीपल डिड नॉट एक्सेप्ट इट। तो आपको दोनों स्टेक होल्डर्स के बारे में सोचना है कि जो पॉलिसी आप बता रहे हो क्या जनता उसको एक्सेप्ट करेगी, जो पॉलिसी आप ड्राफ्ट कर रहे हो क्या पॉलिटिशियंस उसको एक्सेप्ट करेंगे, क्योंकि
अच्छा, यहाँ पे और एक पॉइंट ऐड करना चाहूंगी कि
हाँ
फार्मर्स का जैसे आप बता रहे हैं, तो उन्होंने आईपीआर में ये ऐड किया हुआ है कि फार्मर्स का नया कुछ है, जैसे ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग वगैरह आ गया है, तो उसको वो पेटेंट भी कराना चाहते हैं, ट्रेडमार्क भी कराना चाहते हैं, और लॉस तो आपने विड्रॉ कर लिए। तो यहाँ पे भी कंट्रोवर्सी है ना स्टेटमेंट, और हम
हाँ
कुछ कर नहीं पाते क्योंकि। जी जी, बोलिए सर।
आईपीआर आईपीआर तो एक डिफरेंट चीज हो गई, आईपीआर इज अ डिफरेंट थिंग, मतलब वो
वो
एक अलग फील्ड हो गई।
अलग है, समझ में आ रहा है, लेकिन जब
हाँ
वो फार्मर का कुछ नया उसमें इनोवेशन है, तो हम कैसे करेंगे आगे, क्योंकि आपने फार्मर्स के लॉ सारे विड्रॉ कर लिए,
जी
है ना?
जी।
प्रोटेस्ट हुए, कई सारी
हाँ,
उसमें
तो वो केवल
घटनाएं हुई,
एमएसपी
सब
को
कुछ
लेके
हुआ।
थे, वो जो 3 लॉस थे उसमें मेन मुद्दा एमएसपी का था, मेन मुद्दा उसमें
हम्म,
एमएसपी का था कि एमएसपी होना चाहिए नहीं होना चाहिए, कितना होना चाहिए वगैरह वगैरह। बट काफी मतलब एक एक क्लेम जो गवर्नमेंट के तरफ से या गवर्नमेंट से जुड़े लोगों की तरफ से आया, वो ऐसा था कि उन्होंने लॉस तो बना दिए, लेकिन उन लॉज का कम्युनिकेशन सही ढंग से नहीं पहुंचा
सही ढंग से नहीं हुआ।
स्टेक
सेम इज
होल्डर।
विद लेबर लॉज, सेम इज विद लेबर लॉज।
राइट राइट राइट, है ना।
अभी तक
ऐसे ही
इम्प्लीमेंट
ऐसे
नहीं
ही
हुए।
आप सीए की भी बात कर लीजिए, सीए के साथ भी इट इज द सेम केस। इवन विद सीए द इंटेंशन ऑफ द लॉज माइट हैव बीन गुड, बट द कम्युनिकेशन दैट रीच टू द पीपल हु वर प्रोटेस्टिंग और द पीपल हु स्टार्टेड प्रोटेस्ट, द communication was something else. The communication was that the laws are against certain communities, due to which the committees raised up in arms against the government. So during your policy drafting process, you also need to keep in mind कि आप ऐसी कोई भी terminologies ना यूज करें जिसको गलत तरीके से इंटरप्रेट किया जाए। आप उन पॉलिसीज में ऐसा कोई भी पॉइंट ना इंक्लूड करें जिसपे बैकलैश आने की संभावना रहे। आप ऐसा कोई पॉइंट इंक्लूड ना करें जिसमें पॉलिटिशियंस ही एक्सेप्ट ना करें, क्योंकि अगर पॉलिटिशियंस पॉलिसी अल्टीमेटली पॉलिसी को तो आपको लॉ में बताना पड़ेगा ना, मतलब कोई लीगल फाउंडेशन देना पड़ेगा पॉलिसी को, तभी उस पॉलिसी का कोई मतलब है। वरना पॉलिसी पेपर तो आप और हम बैठ के अभी यहाँ पे ड्राफ्ट कर सकते हैं, लेकिन उसका उसका कोई वेटेज नहीं रहेगा। मतलब it won't carry any weight of its own. It will be just a piece of paper. So in order to translate it into an actual implementable policy on the ground, you need to have the support of the government and the support of the political parties and politicians along with you. So you have to keep this in mind, that these stakeholders also need to be taken together when drafting a certain kind of policy. That
जी
is
सर,
the
धन्यवाद।
larger point
धन्यवाद,
that I
धन्यवाद सर, धन्यवाद।
right. All right. So, finally, finally, you also during the drafting, you also need to answer. You should be able to address the question that applied to the given problem. All right.
Sir, can you please repeat
Hello.
your internet was not working? Can you just please repeat the last point?
Okay. Am I audible now? Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, yes. So the last point which I was making was that during your policy implementation, you should also be able to you should also be able to answer how the government has to apply the solutions that you are proposing to the problem statement that you have identified. है ना? So there should be a clear link or nexus that you are able to establish between the solutions that you have provided and the problem statement that you have identified. Now, initially, I was discussing this with Jayant yesterday, that, I'll take Waqf Amendment Act as a case study and then perhaps discuss it as as an example of how to draft a public policy. But then there were two concerns, obviously. One, that Waqf is quite a sensitive issue. And the second is that besides being a sensitive issue, Waqf is now a proper legislation. And people often get confused between policy and policy and laws. But you need to understand that, as I mentioned in the beginning, when I started this discussion, that law policies only get translated into laws. तो policy और law कोई different entities नहीं है. It is just that not all policies are laws, but all laws are certain policies. This can be definitely stated. Okay, there is another question from Dr. Minarul. Is it a problem in communication or the provision itself? As far as CA is concerned, don't you think it is discrimination just on the... All right, so I mean, CA is a totally different debate altogether. I'm not going to answer this question right now, because it will be diverting us from the subject which we are supposed to discuss today. But definitely, if you want, we can discuss it sometime later, or perhaps Jayant can organize a session on CA itself, and we can have some speakers and a robust discussion on whether the CA provisions were flawed or was it a problem in communication. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
So, all right. So, Jayant.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So now what we can do is perhaps we can quickly take a few questions and then we can wrap up the session.
Sir, I got a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
We haven't talked about monitoring and evaluation of the policy once it has been implemented.
Right. So the reason why I did not discuss it was because we are talking only about the drafting process in this particular session. But if you want, we can pick up like we can talk about monitoring and evaluation as well in a different session maybe. Because monitoring and evaluation is again a very complex process, very complex process. मतलब वो हमारे और आपके बोलने के लिए बड़ा आसान होता है कि अरे सरकार ने पॉलिसी तो बना दी, मॉनिटर कर नहीं रहे। मॉनिटर करेंगे कैसे भाई? अगर कोई पॉलिसी से फॉर एग्जांपल पीडीएस सिस्टम है, उत्तर प्रदेश का पीडीएस सिस्टम है, पब्लिक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन स्कीम, आपने सुना होगा, जिसके अंडर में इतने सारी चीजें वेलफेयर इनिशिएटिव्स लेके और जनता को दी जाती हैं। पीडीएस सिस्टम के बेनिफिशियरीज ही होंगे उत्तर प्रदेश में कुछ नहीं तो 15-16 करोड़। अब उस पॉलिसी का अगर आपको इम्प्लीमेंटेशन देखना है और उसको मॉनिटर करना है तो उसके लिए आप सोचिए कि कितना कॉम्प्लेक्स सिस्टम आपको लगेगा कि एक एक जगह आपको जाके चेक करना पड़ेगा कि हाँ, यहाँ जो पीडीएस की दुकान है से उत्तर प्रदेश के देवरिया जिले के बरपार गांव में पीडीएस की एक दुकान है। वो दुकान में पहुंच के आपको देखना है कि राशन बांटा जा रहा है कि नहीं बांटा जा रहा है। तो ये आप कैसे करोगे? तो आप मैनुअली तो जा नहीं सकते, तो इसके लिए आपको टेक्नोलॉजी का उपयोग करना पड़ेगा, है ना? तो उसके लिए एक्चुअली मतलब यूपी सरकार ने काफी सारी ऐसे इनोवेटिव ये पिकअप किए हैं, मतलब इनोवेटिव ways pick up किए हैं to monitor the PDS system. In fact, I was traveling in UP just a few days ago when Jayant had informed about this session. At that time, I was in Lucknow only. And Lucknow mein I had an interaction, we had a delegation from my from my university. We do something called the Good Governance Yatra. So it was the 8th edition of the Good Governance Yatra. And we were in Lucknow. We were having this discussion with the principal secretary of the planning department of UP. तो आपने यूपी के बारे में काफी न्यूज में पढ़ा होगा कि 1 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी बनने जा रहा है उत्तर प्रदेश। योगी सरकार ने डिसाइड किया है कि दे विल मेक यूपी इनटू दे विल कन्वर्ट यूपी इनटू अ 1 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी बाय 2027 और 2029। दैट इज द टारगेट दैट दे हैव टेकन अप। सो द 1 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी प्रोजेक्ट comes under the supervision of the planning department. So we were having an interaction with the principal secretary of the planning department. His name is Alok Kumar ji. And Alok Kumar ji actually he brilliantly explained us how the entire PDS system is being monitored. So everything has been bought online and हर बेनिफिशियरी को पीडीएस सिस्टम के तहत राशन मिला है कि नहीं वो सब ऑनलाइन अपडेट हो जाता है। तो उसके कारण मॉनिटरिंग बड़ा आसान हो गया है। लेकिन कहने का मेरा अर्थ ये है कि मॉनिटरिंग एंड इवैल्यूएशन इज समथिंग व्हिच इज नॉट वेरी इजी टू डू फॉर पॉलिसीज। So it's a very long drawn process. So I think we'll have to pick that up. Matlab you should request Jain to organize a separate session on this. And
Sir, I
perhaps,
will interfere here once again. Just
yeah,
for the sake of information of all, some government had introduced a medical policy for senior citizens, free medicine, free treatment and all that. So
right,
somebody told me, had given a complaint to me that they are not following. I said, okay, let me go and monitor it and I'll let you know. You won't
right,
believe I went as a lay person. I didn't identify myself. I went there to the hospital, investigated all the departments as a lay
right,
person, and found out that they were 100% doing correct policy implementation. And again, I
right.
got back to that person and said that don't, overact and propaganda मत करिए ऐसे गलत
Ah,
बातें मत फैलाइए।
right,
आपको
right,
जो
right.
चाहिए आप मुझे लेके चलिए साथ में, मैं ले दूंगी आपको।
Right, right,
I
right.
went as a lay person, whole day I
भाई
spent in that
लेकिन
hospital.
देखिए बात क्या है कि ये तो मतलब एक जगह किसी ने कोई इशू रेस किया तो आप जाके उसको चेक कर लिए, है ना।
जी
लेकिन
हाँ।
जब ऐसे 10,000 जगह होंगे तो आप 10 के 10,000 जगह नहीं जा सकते हो। तो उसके लिए आपको और मतलब बहुत सारी प्लानिंग करनी पड़ेगी, उसके लिए टेक्नोलॉजी का यूज करना पड़ेगा, एंड वो यूज करके फिर साइमल्टेनियसली यू हैव टू मॉनिटर all the all the places where the policy is being implemented. So obviously,
Yes, sir.
it's a complex process. It
Ji,
will
I can
need,
understand. Yes, I can understand.
it will need more deliberation. Okay, so Meena Rulji has again commented whether constitutional values should be kept in mind while drafting policies. Definitely, definitely, constitutional values should certainly be kept in mind while drafting policies, for sure. Okay, all right.
Yes.
So,
Yashowardhan sir, can I ask one question, sir?
please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, sir, for your very interesting session. Sir, the point that you have mentioned that while drafting a policy, the government should also be considered the problem and the other factors which you have talked about. तो सर जैसे मान लीजिए अगर हम लोग पॉलिसी ड्राफ्ट कर रहे हैं और बहुत बार ऐसा होता है कि कोई पॉलिसी बनने के बाद भी इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं हो पाती, उसका एक बड़ा रीजन है द फाइनेंशियल कैपेसिटी ऑफ द स्टेट।
Right, right,
तो सर
right.
जैसे हम लोग अगर ड्राफ्ट कर रहे हैं तो हम लोग क्या इस चीज को एक्सेस कर सकते हैं कि फाइनेंशियल कैपेसिटी के बारे में हम स्टेट को बताएं, या उसको भी हमें ड्राफ्ट पॉलिसी में इंक्लूड करना चाहिए क्या सर?
बिल्कुल, देखिए फाइनेंशियल कैपेसिटी तो आपको कंसिडर करना ही पड़ेगा ड्राफ्ट करते हुए, मतलब ड्राफ्ट करने से पहले कंसेप्चुलाइज करते हुए भी आपको फाइनेंशियल कैपेसिटी के बारे में सोचना पड़ेगा ना। आप अगर कल को जाके ये क्लेम कर दो अपने पॉलिसी में, एक पॉलिसी पेपर लिख दो कि हमें सारी जनता में हर मतलब हमारी 140 हमारे देश की हर इंसान को 1 करोड़ रुपए मिलने चाहिए, तो मतलब इज इट फीजिबल? इट्स प्रैक्टिकली इम्पॉसिबल। तो ऑब्वियसली यू हैव टू कीप द फाइनेंशियल कंस्ट्रेंट्स इन माइंड while you know while drafting any policy, definitely.
थैंक यू सर।
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, any other question, participant suggestion?
Yeah, there is one more question from Madhuri Pundir. She is asking what is the common factor in the policies that fail? देखिए, as far as मतलब there are multiple factors due to which policies fail, but as far as drafting is concerned, the biggest problem with policy drafting is that the policy makers leave several loopholes, जिसके कारण इंटरप्रिटेशन ही क्लियर नहीं हो पाता है कि पॉलिसी को इंप्लीमेंट कैसे करना है। तो लूप होल्स नहीं होने चाहिए कभी भी किसी भी पॉलिसी में। लूप होल्स इन व्हाट सेंस? लूप होल्स इन द सेंस दैट as I mentioned, overlap between certain legislations, certain questions that had to be addressed, or certain roles of stakeholders that had to be answered which are not answered in the policy document. So the policy document has to be very comprehensive. It has to answer the, like, you have to think like a visionary when you are drafting a policy, because even if you are drafting a short term policy, you have to you should leave no scope for people finding any loopholes in it, because if there are certain loopholes, then there will be leakages and there will be interpretation issues, and ultimately it will result in failure of implementation of the policy. All right, there is yeah. So okay, so I hope I have been able to answer the questions. If there are some more questions, you can just let me know, or you can also communicate through Jayant, so I'll be more than happy to answer the questions.
Yes, sir.
Yes, any further
I
question,
think
participant? Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
You can unmute and ask or raise your hand. We have few more minutes. If any questions are there. How much time is
To form
provided
a
to form a policy before implementation?
it again, this is something which will depend on the policy that you are drafting. Like, say for example, an article abrogation of article 370 could not be drafted in a few months. It was it took years to, think about how can this article be abrogated. But then if you talk about, say, yeah, so okay, there is one more comment from Minarul Ji. She is mentioning loopholes are supposed to be addressed with subordinate legislation. Yeah, so see, this is the problem that I'm trying to mention. As you mentioned that loopholes are supposed to be addressed with subordinate legislation. I don't think that this is the kind of approach that we should keep in mind. मतलब इसको as a default लेके हमें नहीं चलना चाहिए. What we should do is जो भी loopholes हैं, आप लूप होल्स छोड़िए ही मत ना आपके पॉलिसी डॉक्यूमेंट में. मतलब एट द स्टेज ऑफ लेजिस्लेशन इटसेल्फ you should try and fill all the gaps or all the vacuum beforehand. उसके बाद भी obviously loopholes रहते हैं. वो जो loopholes रहेंगे they can be answered by subordinate legislation. If you leave loopholes to be answered by subordinate legislation or to be addressed by subordinate legislation, the problem which arises is कि आपके subordinate legislation मतलब rules and regulations इतने ज्यादा हो जाते हैं कि वो implement करना बहुत difficult हो जाता है. एंड जो आपके citizens हैं एंड stakeholders हैं वो उनका ट्रैक ही नहीं रख पाते हैं. बहुत कॉम्प्लिकेटेड हो जाता है प्रोसेस, तो पॉलिसी फेलियर हो जाता है. And as I said, yes, still loopholes will remain. लेकिन we have to, मतलब loopholes will remain does not mean that कि हम उसको एड्रेस ना करें. हम हमारे तरफ से जितना प्रयास कर सकते हैं उतना हमें एड्रेस करना चाहिए. Yeah, then there is another question or example of a well drafted policy in India or in any other country for reference. Well drafted policy. Well, I don't know what should be the criteria for, considering a policy to be very well drafted, because in a country like India, policy making is extremely complex. So, I don't know what is your, what do you mean when you say that it should be, this is a well drafted policy. But, say for example, even the artificial policy on AI in India, it is like it has been drafted decently as compared to other countries. तो मतलब आप AI पे policies पढ़िए, that will give you an example about what are the challenges, क्योंकि it is futuristic as well. The problem that artificial intelligence raises itself is very futuristic. So that is real policy making.
So even NEP can be considered as a good policy.
NEP is a decently drafted
To some
policy,
extent. To some extent.
to some extent, yes. RTI is a good example. Yes, RTI is a good example.
Yeah,
Uh,
Nalini ma'am, like to say something on RTE, right to education. Ma'am is an
No,
expert.
he's shaking. He's saying about RTI, not RTE.
नहीं मैं
RTE के
RTE
बारे में
your
मैम
thought on this.
definitely बात कर सकते हैं, because RTE again is it's a well drafted legislation.
So मैम आपका क्या कहना है नलिनी मैम, अच्छा है बुरा है? So मैम is an expert on RTE, so that's why I asked. It takes time, right? I would say, testing it goes in market. It's like a product, I would say. It goes in the market. People check it out, how it goes.
How
That's the
do the
thing.
citizens respond to it? How do the stakeholders respond?
True.
But
Sometimes,
but
our
the
professor.
schools are against all these things, you know. If you talk about RTE to school management, they will immediately take action on the student. Immediately. And suddenly at night, midnight, 10 o'clock, you are saying within 1 hour, 2 hours, you transfer so much amount to our account because children have to go out for an excursion. And how can, if suppose I'm not having in my account so much money, 60,000, so how do I react? Where do I go? And you are
मैडम
taking action on
खाना
the
भी नहीं
student.
मिलता है मैडम, उनको अलग बिठाया जाता है, खाना भी नहीं मिलता है ऐसा.
मैं वही बोल रही हूँ, फिर वो स्टूडेंट के ऊपर एक्शन लेते हैं, jealousy, you मतलब it is not good, ना? Then they will keep that student aside, exclusion. And then if we go to RTE, again problem. That is what, na, and, as sir is saying, that we have to think a long way to implement some policy. what will be the outcome of it? A deep survey has to be taken into account. Such problems do come up. I am just
Definitely,
saying general.
definitely. And मतलब as I mentioned, देखिए लूप होल्स तो अल्टीमेटली रहेंगे ही रहेंगे, क्योंकि आप
जी
हर चीज को विजुलाइज या मतलब आप अल्टीमेटली वी आर नॉट गॉड, राइट? तो हम
हाँ
सबको
वो
पहले
तो है।
हर एक चीज को हम पहले से ये नहीं कर सकते हैं, हम ना
हम्म
ही डिफाइन कर सकते हैं प्रॉब्लम्स को, ना ही आइडेंटिफाई
नहीं
कर
नहीं
सकते
कुछ नहीं कर सकते सर जी, कुछ
हैं।
नहीं।
वो बिल्कुल, जब
लेकिन
वो
जो
प्रैक्टिकल लेवल पे हम पॉलिसी को इम्प्लीमेंट करने जाएंगे तब हमें समझ में आएगा कि वो ये तो
हाँ
ये समस्या भी थी जो
लेकिन
जिसके बारे में हमने सोचा ही नहीं।
रिएक्शन जो होती है ना वो समझ में नहीं अच्छी नहीं लगती। बच्चों के साथ आप दुश्मनी क्यों कर रहे हो? अब मेरे पास नहीं है पैसे तो आप दुश्मनी करोगे बच्चे के साथ?
राइट, राइट, नहीं वो तो दीज
मैं
आर
नहीं
द
मतलब आई एम
मतलब
टॉकिंग जनरल, आई एम
there are
टॉकिंग जनरल।
right, 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 I get it, I get it. There are multiple problems. I mean, these are problems which arise with the human conduct as well. So you talk about like you can keep I can keep blabbering about having good policies and drafting good policies, but ultimately if you don't have good humans to implement those policies, तो आप कितना भी ड्राफ्ट कर लो और कितने भी क्रिस्टल क्लियर पॉलिसीज बना लो, कुछ नहीं होने वाला है।
नहीं
तो
नहीं धन्यवाद
अल्टीमेटली
सर
इट
जी आप।
बॉइल्स डाउन टू द पीपल हु हैव टू कैरी
यस
दोस पॉलिसीज फॉरवर्ड।
हमारी सोच सही है लेकिन जैसे जैसे प्रॉब्लम आएंगे तो सॉल्यूशन भी निकलता ही जाएगा उसका।
राइट, 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 राइट।
धन्यवाद सर जी, धन्यवाद।
ओके, ओके। तो
Can take a last question if you want to answer.
there is one
For
question
your
actually
side.
in the chat. Okay, so Vaibhav Tripathi ji is asking, what is the policy of making government websites and why are they not user friendly? Vaibhav ji, I really don't know how do the governments prepare their websites, whom do they outsource it to, do they outsource it or do they prepare the websites in-house? I'm not aware about it, but yeah, I do agree with you that they're definitely not at all user friendly and they should be made user friendly. I think this is also one of the important steps of policy making, which is that you at least consult the stakeholders once you have prepared something. तो वेबसाइट बनाने के बाद अगर जनता से 10 लोगों को बैठा के उस वेबसाइट को चलवाएं एंड फिर अगर सरकार उनकी बात सुने कि अच्छा हमें ये समस्याएं आ रही हैं, तो अपने आप वो उसको रिफॉर्म कर देंगे, मतलब वेबसाइट को फिर ठीक कर सकते हैं। बट आई गेस इट्स ऑन द गवर्नमेंट टू डू। या
Yes, sometimes it like most of the time they give to NIC center to making website, or sometimes they outsource like GST,
राइट,
the
राइट, राइट,
Tata,
हाँ जैसे
Infosys,
जीडीसी वगैरह का तो एनआईसी ही आई
yeah,
थिंक।
and then some government like GST, like they can do like give to Tata, Infosys, they also do. And I would like to share one of the experience. There's no website of Gujarat State Legal Service Authority. There's a under the Legal Service Authority Act. Then I wrote a mail to NALSA and CC
राइट,
to
राइट।
Chief Justice of India, Chief Justice of Gujarat High Court. There is no website, and then I didn't get the reply, but website was ready after some time.
Okay, so
So I can take proud, I would say,
so
in
this is
that.
an important point to be noted by all the participants that आप पॉलिसी को ऐसे भी इन्फ्लुएंस कर सकते हैं थ्रू इंटरवेंशंस।
Yeah, I wrote a letter 1.5 page. I will share in group participant कि website नहीं है, it's very और websites है. There is no website Gujarat State Legal Service Authority. Then it was ready after some time. जवाब नहीं आया
राइट।
लेटर का, so it happens. I keep telling all the whenever I take the lecture, don't expect reply from @gov.in @nic.in.
हाँ,
Reply
हाँ, हाँ,
बहुत कम आता है.
इट इज वेरी रेयर, वेरी रेयर, वेरी
If
रेयर।
you get it, you are lucky that particular day. So that is the thing.
यस, वेरी ट्रू।
I think we are done with all the questions. Jayant, you would like to vote of thanks or yes, Jayant?
I think
Jayant,
Jayant is there, but he'll have to unmute himself. Jayant, can you hear us?
I think able to do. So thank you very much, Yashowardhan, for your great session. Again, returning
Thank
your
you.
inside listen to our programs you did last time also, and then great interaction. It's one of the interactive sessions so far in our program. So that's the thing, like, no, it's one-sided lecture is not be there, and
Right.
we also need participants from the participant both sides also. Thank you very much, and then I look forward to seeing you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for providing the opportunity. Sabhi ko namaskar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a great session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Really
Thank
kind
you,
of you.
sir. God bless you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Excellent interactive session. Excellent.
Looking
Ma'am,
forward to.
Very much.
again, let me tell you, ma'am is 76-year-old, having
Arey,
50,
okay,
yeah, so
okay.
50 year plus experience. It's a inspiration for all of us.
Thank you, sir. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you
Happy
so much.
Ram Navami.
आप
Happy
सभी
Ram
को
Navami to all of you.
जय
राम
Happy
श्री
नवमी
Ram
के
राम।
Navami.
हार्दिक
जी जी जी।